About 6 years ago, I was seeing a girl I'll call Rachel. We'd been together for around 8 months, and as far as I knew, things were smooth, normal, and even happy. We lived in the same town, worked nearby, and went through the usual routine of dating. We met online on a site kind of like OkCupid, and after a few casual meetups, it turned into something more serious. We hadn't moved in together yet, though I'd thought about asking her. Rachel often said she loved her independence, and I didn't want to repeat mistakes from past relationships where I'd rushed in too quickly. Instead, our thing became little trips together. Long weekends, short vacations, sometimes visiting family, sometimes just heading out to shop or explore. One time we even hit several theme parks in a row. We were that couple, always planning a getaway. From my perspective, things were headed somewhere solid. I was even thinking down the road about proposing. But looking back now, that trip changed everything. Rachel and I had never gone camping before. We didn't want to drive too far, so we picked Rhode Island. It had some great campgrounds and seemed perfect. Not too crowded, but not completely isolated either. With a stretch near the coast where we could spend the second half of the vacation in an Airbnb. It was early autumn, the best time of year out there. The drive took close to 8 hours with stops, but once we reached the forest roads, Rachel was glued to the window, gushing over the colors and scenery. I remember feeling lucky in that moment, like life couldn't get better. Our campsite was gorgeous. Hardly any other people around, just a few scattered families, but our spot was tucked at the edge near the trees. A pond shimmered nearby in the evening light. I even told Rachel it felt picture perfect, though in hindsight that sounds ridiculously cheesy. That first night was wonderful. We grilled hot dogs by the fire, spent some time in the tent, and later wandered under the stars by the pond. With my arm around her, watching the moon ripple across the water, I thought I'd found exactly what I'd always wanted. I couldn't have been more wrong. The peace didn't last. I don't know what time it was when Rachel shook me awake, whispering that she heard something moving outside. At first, I brushed it off, probably an animal nosing around for scraps. But then came the sound of metal scraping, like something heavy brushing against the car. I unzipped the tent and peeked out. My stomach dropped. Our car was rocking like someone or something was pushing against it. Branches cracked underfoot, and for a split second I swore I saw a shadow slip past the fire pit. I froze, listening. The night was too quiet except for Rachel's breathing behind me. Then, clear as day, I heard footsteps circling. Not fast, not panicked, slow, deliberate. We stayed locked inside the tent, barely breathing until silence returned. I told Rachel we'd check in the morning, and somehow we managed a few hours of uneasy sleep. When daylight came, I wished it hadn't. The back window of our car was shattered. Glass littered the ground, and deep gouges like something had clawed at the paint ran down the side panel. At first I thought maybe a bear had come through, but the footprints in the dirt weren't anything like a bear's. They looked human, bare feet, but far too big. We should have left right then, but Rachel convinced me it must have been vandals or maybe some drunk campers messing around. She wanted to salvage the trip, and I didn't want to ruin it for her. So we cleaned up what we could, taped a plastic bag over the broken window, and tried to shake it off. That afternoon we hiked for a while and even laughed about it, pretending it wasn't such a big deal. But when we came back, something was wrong again. Our phones were gone. Not just misplaced, gone. We always left them charging in the car, tucked under the console, and both were missing. No sign of them, no footprints this time, nothing. Just empty space where they'd been. Rachel's face drained of color. She started insisting we pack up immediately, but the sun was already dipping low. Driving through the woods at night with a broken window and no GPS felt like asking for trouble. I tried to calm her down, said we'd stick it out one more night, leave at first light. I wish I hadn't said that. That second night is burned into my memory. Around 3 a.m., a sound jolted me awake, a low, drawn-out howl echoing through the trees. It wasn't a coyote, wasn't a wolf. It was deeper, heavier, almost like it vibrated the air. Rachel sat up immediately, clutching my arm. Then the tent walls trembled. Something was pressing against it, moving around us. Branches snapped just beyond the nylon, heavy footsteps crunching in the dirt. I felt Rachel's nails digging into my skin, both of us frozen stiff. The zipper rattled. Not all the way, but enough to make me realize someone or something was touching it. I worked up the courage to peek out. At first, nothing. Just our dying campfire flickering weak orange light. Then a figure stepped into view, tall, broad-shouldered, a dark silhouette that blocked the glow. It just stood there, sniffing the air like an animal. But the posture was wrong. Too upright, too human. My mouth went dry. I couldn't even whisper to Rachel. We both sat in silence, hearts pounding as the figure lingered, shifting slightly, its head turning as though it was scanning the camp. After what felt like forever, it moved. One step, another. Then it melted back into the tree line, the firelight catching its outline before swallowing it whole. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. We just waited, clutching each other, jumping at every crack of the woods. By sunrise, I was ready to leave no matter what. But the worst wasn't over. By the next day, neither of us wanted to admit how shaken we were, but it showed. Every snapped twig made us jump. Every gust of wind sounded like a footstep. That afternoon, Rachel decided to distract herself with her camera. She wandered a little way from camp, snapping shots of the ridgeline, the river, the trees. When she came back, she was pale. "Edward, look at this." She showed me her camera screen. At first, it was just a blurry shot of the tree line. But in the corner, partially hidden by the brush, was a figure. A human shape, upright, watching. I told her it could have been a trick of the light, a hiker maybe, but my stomach twisted. Because deep down, I knew it wasn't either of those. That evening, when we returned from filling our water bottles, something new was waiting on the log outside our tent. A neat little pile of fruit. Apples and berries. Arranged carefully like an offering, Rachel refused to touch it. I didn't either. We just sat there staring at it, the silence between us heavy, both of us thinking the same thing but too afraid to say it out loud. The following morning, we broke camp. We couldn't take it anymore. As we packed, though, one last thing happened. Painted across a tree trunk near the cave in jagged red letters was a single word: leave. We didn't need telling twice. We hiked out without looking back, every step faster than the last. Even now, years later, Rachel swears that someone, or something, had been tracking us that whole trip. And me? I still can't shake the memory of that shadow by the fire. Back in the early 2010s, my buddy Edward and I used to go camping all over the Sierra Nevada, sometimes near Mount Whitney, sometimes hiking around Lake Tahoe, but really anywhere we could find a good spot. We were both born and raised in California, and that mountain range was our favorite escape whenever life got too loud. One time, we picked a place neither of us had explored before. It was remote, untouched, and there were no signs anyone had ever camped there. That's exactly the kind of spot Edward loved to photograph and I loved to write about. I was big into journaling back then, posting my overly poetic nature rambles on Tumblr, while Edward was always behind his Nikon, chasing perfect shots for photography competitions. That first night was calm. We grilled burgers, camped under the trees, and woke up the next morning feeling fresh, ready to explore. A small river cut through the area, so we followed it upstream until we reached the base of a mountain. Edward spotted a golden eagle soaring overhead, and later, from a safe distance, we even saw a mountain lion moving across the rocks. By midday, we found some shade under a cliff to rest and eat. Edward wandered off with his camera and then called me over with excitement. He'd discovered a cave. The dark opening gave me an uneasy feeling. Black bears and mountain lions were common in the area, and for all we knew, this was their den. But Edward was eager to get some shots, and since we had bear spray and were armed, we stepped inside. The deeper we went, the darker it became. My flashlight barely cut through the shadows, and then crunch. I looked down and realized I'd stepped on a bone, maybe from a deer. Before I could react, Edward grabbed my arm and whispered for me to look ahead. Something moved. A shadow darted across the cave wall. For a second, I thought I saw pale skin in the beam of my light. Edward whispered, "It's a person." I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed. And then, another shadow. Edward wanted to get out, but my curiosity kept me rooted. Stories of people living in caves in the Sierra Nevada had always fascinated me. I wanted to believe this was one of them. But Edward dragged me back toward the exit, and just before we got out, a voice shouted from the darkness, "Get gone," followed by a string of curses. That wasn't the voice of some old mountain hermit. It sounded more like the addicts I'd seen panhandling in cities. Suddenly, the whole thing felt a lot more dangerous than mysterious. We ran out and hiked back toward camp, but when we arrived, our blood ran cold. The tent was splattered in red. For a second it looked like blood, but up close it was clearly paint. Red paint had been thrown all over our gear. Across the tent someone had written one word: leave. So we did. We hiked back to the car, drove to the nearest town, and checked into a motel. That night, while drinking at a bar, we told the bartender what had happened. He just laughed and said that area was crawling with meth cooks and junkies. According to him, we were lucky. We could have walked into a trailer or worse. He even claimed there were shootings around there nearly every week. Edward and I never went back to that part of the Sierra Nevada again. We kept camping for years, but from then on, we stuck to safer trails and well-known spots. Some adventures just aren't worth the risk. Hey, I'm Edward. Back when I was a teenager, I was obsessed with camping. A bunch of my mates and I would head out to the moors whenever we had the chance. Usually we'd pile into Dan's beat-up car on a Friday night, loaded with tents, drinks, cheap barbecues, and way too much food. We all got hooked on camping after doing the Duke of Edinburgh stuff in school, basically survival training and community service. One of my friends, Marcus, loved it so much that he actually joined the army, but the rest of us just kept it up during uni breaks. We weren't all exactly the outdoorsy type. Marcus was the athletic one, a rugby-obsessed sports science student. Then there was Elliot, a nerdy engineering guy who always got ribbed for being a geek, even though he had the best car and naturally became our unofficial leader. Then you had Oliver, Chris, and me, studying physics, English, and drama. And yeah, I'll admit it, I was a theater kid, but I was a loud one. We liked being rowdy, but we also liked the quiet. That's why we'd head into the middle of nowhere, surrounded by mud, cows, and fresh countryside air, and just let loose. That was the plan that summer. 7 nights of drinking, laughing and camping in our secret spot. Only this time, something was different. One morning, after a heavy night of drinking, we stumbled out of our tents with splitting headaches and noticed an older couple setting up camp not too far from us. It was weird because we thought nobody else knew about this forest clearing. We'd even built a makeshift fire pit out of bricks, and until then we'd never seen anyone else using it. We walked over to say hello. The woman was in her 60s, thin and wiry, with messy hair and huge round glasses that made her look like a cartoon. The man was massive, broad shoulders, thick beard, wearing an old army jacket that didn't fit quite right, and a hat decorated with pins and badges. The moment I saw him, something clicked. Wait, you're Mr. Harwood, right? You used to teach art at my school. Sure enough, it was him. He'd taught me in secondary school before suddenly leaving halfway through my exams. He'd been one of my favorites, so I was genuinely surprised to see him out here. He introduced the woman as his partner, who called herself Tesco, like the supermarket. Weird, but we laughed it off. We helped them pitch their tent, and they claimed they'd camped here before and used our fire pit plenty of times. Strange, since we'd never noticed, but whatever. We didn't question it much. Later that day, we went hiking. Marcus disappeared into the woods on his own. Typical for him, so we didn't think much of it. By the time we got back, the couple was sitting by the fire. That night, we hung out with them, drank, listened to music, and grilled steaks. Harwood told wild stories about his army days, the 60s hippie scene, and his life on the road. His partner mostly stayed quiet, just joking occasionally about us eating meat while she stuck to her vegan talk. Then, as the sun dipped, Harwood pulled out a stash of drugs, weed, pills, LSD, even mushrooms. He claimed they'd picked the mushrooms earlier on their hike, but they were clearly dried and packaged, not fresh. Elliot went straight for the joint, while Harwood kept insisting I try acid or at least pop a pill. I refused again and again. He got pushier each time. Eventually, they brewed mushroom tea without asking. Elliot grabbed a cup before they could stop him, and not long after, he was stumbling into the woods, hallucinating. That's when things started to spiral. Harwood and Tesco kept pressuring me to drink the tea, shoving a mug into my hands. I pretended to sip, smacking my lips like it was delicious, but inside I was panicking. My vision blurred, my stomach churned, and I started puking into the leaves. Tesco slung her arm around me, pulling me close while Harwood pressed harder, trying to slip pills into my mouth. Their hands were everywhere, and Harwood whispered about free love and communes and asked me to take off my clothes. I spat out the pill and shouted at him, but the forest around me twisted with shadows. Harwood's face warped into something demonic, and Tesco looked like a screeching bird. Then I heard a roar from the trees. At first, I thought it was some kind of monster, but it wasn't. It was Marcus charging through the woods with a massive branch in his hands. He stormed into camp, yelling at Harwood to get away from me, then smashed their tent to pieces with one swing. The couple scrambled back, Harwood fumbling with his trousers, while Marcus shoved a can of Coke into my hands, forcing me to drink. The sugar jolted me awake just enough to realize what had nearly happened. Marcus grabbed Harwood by the collar, shouting in his face before forcing him and Tesco to leave. The next morning, I woke up to find Marcus sitting calmly by the fire, while the others slowly came around with pounding hangovers. That's when Marcus told us everything, why he'd gone off into the woods. Back in school, he said Harwood had made creepy advances toward him on a trip years ago. Nothing that could ever be proven, but enough that when he saw him again, he knew something wasn't right. That's why he stormed off, to calm down before he exploded. And when he returned, he found exactly what he'd feared. It turns out Harwood had left the school years earlier after rumors about his behavior. Nothing proven, nothing official, but Marcus believed it. And now so did I. We never saw Harwood or Tesco again, but that night left its mark. Camping never felt the same after that, and I'll always be grateful Marcus came crashing through those woods when he did, because if he hadn't, well, I don't even want to think about it. My name is Lucas, and I grew up in Germany. I've always been an adventurer at heart. Hiking, camping, pushing myself into the wilderness, I live for it. I've crossed most of Europe on foot, climbing, trekking, and exploring every forest or mountain worth seeing. But for a long time, there was one place I dreamed of: the Appalachian Mountains in the United States. So many chilling legends come from those hills, and I wanted to feel them for myself. I usually travel alone. Solitary trips suit me, and though I'd faced small troubles now and then in Europe, nothing ever serious happened. That gave me the confidence, maybe foolish confidence, to take on the Appalachian Trail by myself in the summer of 2014. I landed in the U.S., stayed briefly with some online friends, then rented a car and drove to the trailhead. I promised everyone I'd stick to the marked path, but deep down I knew I wouldn't. I like going where instinct pulls me. For a couple of days I behaved and stayed on the official route, but soon the massive trees and untouched forest lured me off course. These weren't like the trees back home. They were ancient, towering like pillars holding up the sky. I set up camp by a small pond that night, overwhelmed by how different this wilderness felt from Germany. Lying under the stars, I thought I'd found paradise. But later, I woke to sound. At first it was like howling wolves, maybe? I had no gun, only a hunting knife, since I was a foreigner traveling light. I froze in the tent, clutching that blade, listening. The howls changed into voices. Not clear at first, but then words took shape. If you leave, you'll die. If you leave, you'll die. Over and over, chanted from somewhere in the darkness, I shouted back, "Leave where?" A reply came, low and sharp. "If you step out of the tent, you'll die." "Will you kill me?" I demanded, no answer. Only another howl, then more footsteps crunching around me. They circled my tent. Fear like I'd never known before gripped me. I'd traveled alone so many times, but this was different. Then a voice hissed, "Stay inside." I clutched my knife tighter. More footsteps. A sudden commotion outside, shouts, running, chaos. My campfire flared up again, and I realized someone had fed it. Panic surged through me. Would they burn me alive inside my tent? Gunshots cracked, one, then another. Laughter followed, mocking. The same voice returned. "Don't come out. Stay where you are." I thought about rushing out, fighting with my knife, but what chance did I have against unseen men with guns? If I stayed inside, maybe I'd live. So I obeyed. 2 more shots. More laughter. And then, after a while, silence. The fire died down. And finally, I felt less like I'd be set ablaze. Exhaustion overcame terror, and somehow I fell asleep. When I woke, daylight had returned. For a brief moment, I forgot. Then it all rushed back. Slowly, I unzipped the tent and looked out. Nothing. No men. No bodies, only trampled plants, but by the ashes of my fire. Someone had left a 6-pack of beer. I didn't touch it. I packed up and left. 2 days later, I emerged from the woods, my trip cut short. I've been back to the Appalachian Trail since, but never alone and always sticking to the markers. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there. Some say it was just cruel locals playing a prank. Others suggest something darker lurks in those forests. All I know is this: Appalachia is breathtaking, but also haunted, dangerous. and I pray I'll never cross paths with those voices again.